So this chap here surfing this wave is an American called Greg Long. And he says it's impossible. He no longer feels scared by any wave that he ever surfs because he is fully prepared for every single eventuality that happens. There's no circumstance that he can find himself in that he's not prepared for in his mind and in his body, which allows him to surf waves like this for fun on a good Thursday or Friday, which you get. I can't even conceive doing this. What I want to talk to you about is the relationship between what we see, what we notice, what we prepare for, and what we commit to do as AOMBs and the people that we're there with. And a part of the seeing bit is to understand how narrow our focus gets if we're not careful. How narrow our focus gets about who's in the room with us today. Who's in the room when we normally talk about what we're trying to do. So to answer Philip's question, TYF. TYF is a business I started just over 30 years ago. And TYF is a business, we're a dating agency for nature. Our purpose as a business is to get people to fall so deeply in love with nature through experiences in the outdoors that it changes their relationship with it forever, to the extent at which it shifts their behavior on a day-to-day basis. And if we fail to do that, I think we should go home. Because the scale of change demands we need to shift the behavior of around about 7 billion people fairly quickly. And unless we're focusing on large-scale change that's triggered by love and joy and hope and connection rather than fear, we will kind of miss the point and we'll lose our landscapes in the process. And TYF itself is the initials of Tour de Velin, which is Tower of the Mill in Welsh. We live in St David's on the west coast of Wales. People shortened the name of the business to TYF when they came from England. Although we sold the hotel, we kept the initials. So that's where it came from. And we take people coasteering. I know I was talking to someone yesterday about this. I started the sport of coasteering way back in Pembrokeshire in the late 1980s. We take people sea kayaking and do loads of work with schools and stuff, which I'll talk about in a bit. So just a quick reminder, I'm not going to go into this in a big way, but just to remind you that things aren't good in the hood. And we didn't talk about this much yesterday, and I'm assuming it's because you all know it, but just a quick reminder just in case. And I'm not going to make this an interactive session, okay, but 63%, that's the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture that you'd get by shifting to a largely vegetarian diet. Agriculture is responsible for a third of the world's carbon emissions. It's a huge impact if we shift away from meat-based diets. If 50% is the loss of biodiversity in my lifetime, 18,000 hectares, that's the amount that the HSBC are considering whether or not to support clear-cutting the 18,000 hectares of prime forest to make palm oil. You know, this is already happening at large scale, so we can have nicer stuff to put in our food. And the bottom right-hand side is the number of deaths in the UK every year due to dirty air. And could go on. You know, there could be slides and slides of this, but it's really important to remember that what the scale of what we're trying to do. And I want to get in terms of the other bits that we see. This figure is the forecast value of insect-based plant foods and insect-based animal foods in 2025. It's currently $10 million pound business. So people are going to be feeding animals protein from insects, not palm oil in the future. So this is growing really fast. There's a company in the States called Impossible Meats. This burger is made from plant protein. Their intention is to eliminate animals from meat. The stated ambition is to take animals away out of meat, take the meat away from animals. Now, there's a $200 billion business in the States up for grabs. There's a whole bunch of people in technology saying, I'm going to have this. So when farmers assume that they've got the right to produce food, the right to produce stuff, is no longer taken for granted. There are hundreds of millions of dollars being invested right now in exactly the opposite. And what that means for landscape is potentially quite interesting. What it means for farmers, and we'll hear a bit about land values and the impact of Brexit, amongst other things. Perfect Day are a milk alternative, using 15% of the carbon and 5% of the land to produce casein and a milk that's just not made from, it's made from pea protein, not cows. In the world of trees, biocarbon engineering can plant 10 trees a minute using drones. They're up and running now. They can release fleets of drones into the landscape, plot the landscape, work out where you want your trees, and plant tree seeds and fertilizer with air compressors. Well, it's doing large-scale reforestation projects. So my pitch to you is that we need to radically optimize the way that we use our landscape in a way that hasn't even been discussed by most people who use the land or interact with us through the AONBs. And that is completely rethinking our relationship with landscape and health. In Wales, where I live, the gross cost of mental health is equivalent to half of the entire public budget. There's lots of little bits going on around well-being and nature, but no one is commercializing this successfully yet. How do we get, as AONBs, to be paid more than GSK for keeping people healthy? At scale. How do we take the pharmaceutical business out by doing prevention in nature? How do we issue the bonds, the imagination that allows us to do that? The building here, the amazing building here on Gower, a place run by a charity called Down to Earth, was built by adults with brain injury as therapy. It was cheaper to do this than do traditional treatments on the NHS, to build an amazing, amazing space here. So the conversations that we're having in Wales that really excite me with the farming community is essentially, I talked to the members of the farming union separately and said, my opinion is that farming is largely broken. We're producing food in an unsustainable way, losing soil and losing nutrients, losing biodiversity. Loads of farmers committing suicide, and we're producing food that kills people. Apart from that, it's great. And fundamentally, there's a choice to be made. So you can either hope that forever, the Band-Aid fairy is going to come out of the money tree at Christmas and backfill the cupboard and keep patching up a broken industry, or you can fix it forever. And if you go down the second choice, we and my mates will bring the coolest companies you've ever thought of to your table and help to build a future for food in 2050 that is genuinely fit for future generations. So bringing the people who know what's needed to that table. And if you want to go for the former and the Band-Aid one, then good luck, because it's not going to work long term. So I've been out and about talking to people about this and working out different ways of doing it, which I'll come back to in a second. And we wonder about getting stuck for money. Common theme with people in this room today. A mate of mine, Paul Cripps, runs a business in Peru, rafting and trekking business. His customers have paid for him to plant 500,000 trees. So they funded the trees, he gets local nurseries to grow them, and they're planted by local villagers. Fully funded by his customers. When we talk about this being money, there are shed loads of money around. But to get it, we need to be more creative. One of the most creative things that's happening in the world of business is this. There's a new network, global network of businesses called B Corporation. The B stands for better. And there's 2,000 businesses with a combined revenue of $85 billion who are intent on changing capitalism from the inside out. To become a B Corp, you have to change your constitution to include community and nature as part of your stakeholder. And then answer a hard-asked 200-point questionnaire to prove you're good enough. And then declare your results publicly. It is by far the best network I've ever joined in terms of making impact. And I would implore you to make sure that the maximum number of businesses in every AONB practice in a way that's congruent with the point of the AONB existing. Public sector right now spend millions of pounds buying stuff that makes life in nature harder. Because they buy from businesses whose purposes aren't aligned with the long-term future. So B Corp by far is the best network. And our goal is to get billions of people to put their money and their pocket in line with where their heart is to make those kind of things happen. So in terms of preparing for this, my theory of everything in one slide, highly recommended if you haven't got one. So, however you measure performance, 0 to 10, and a focus of effort can focus on just doing what the rules require, or responding to the reality they know is coming, or here already. So left-hand side, generally speaking, the rules, government's not very good at delivery. It's not geared up for delivery. I talked to chief exec of a local authority in Wales and said, where would you put your performance? He said, bear in mind you have 15-year-old heroin addicts in the street, a 12-year difference in life expectancy over 3 miles of our community, I'd put us 2 out of 10 on the left-hand side. Corporates, generally, are really good at shipping. They're good at getting stuff out the door, but they get the wrong stuff out the door. It's quite legal to make polystyrene. It's quite legal to make furniture, but it's impossible to recycle. It's quite legal to grow cotton using 25% of the world's agrochemicals, not knowing it. And the corporates are amazing at doing that. In the bottom right-hand side, this is where people really understand what's going on, but don't ship at a level of big change, is a space for tree huggers, geographers, and academics. I'm a geographer, okay? And this is where people really get to know, they really know what needs to happen, but never did the marketing and communications and finance and project management stuff that allows them to scale their ambition. And in the top right is where reality meets 10 out of 10. So when I ask you, say, well, how many kids leaving school in AOMBs would you like to feel confident had the skills to change the future? So they've crafted the skills of managing energy and resources and clothing and food. If you couldn't fail, how many kids would leave school with skills to change the future? 3%. When I talk to people and say, well, how many would you like to do? The answer is, well, we've got some great case studies. That's the answer to a different question. How about scaling up ambition and saying, wouldn't it be nice if AOMBs became the place where the cool shit happens first, rather than last? Should the AOMBs not be incubators of amazing practice by business and communities, where the millions of people who visit AOMBs see the future for the first time, rather than grasp onto that last bit of the past before it crumbles into dust? Imagine what would happen in terms of the inspiration if we did that. So my experience is that when you set bold goals, other people who have ambition say yes. So when I talk to the farmers about the Band-Aid fairy or shifting the problem, all these businesses immediately said, of course, we'll come and help you. Just call us when you're ready. No one has said no. So we'll come and build you that future for 2035 or 2040. So I think we have, as leaders of organizations with a mandate to protect areas of outstanding national beauty, we have a mandate, I believe, to create people of outstanding natural curiosity and understand how the people in our community, how do we tap in to the amazing knowledge and passion of the people in our communities and properly release that on the stuff that matters and work out what is it we can do together that becomes remarkable. The lovely project that Mark did here by using the reciprocating roof. He says the structure of the roof becomes the message of the way we work, where there is no main beam, because they all depend on each other, and that becomes the message of the way we work here. And one of the things we did in terms of working together, in Pembrokeshire 20 years ago, we set up a thing called the Outdoor Charter. Every single adventure operator in Pembrokeshire now works together through this organisation to improve our environmental standards. In terms of R10, we're nowhere close, but there's a start of a conversation on how to do this. I think that we could collectively do the equivalent of create a first aid at work course for nature. To say, if you want to deliver outdoor pursuits in the national parks or take other groups into the national parks, AMBs, you need to be qualified to do so and learn to teach people how to fall in love with nature. I think it's time to reboot volunteering completely. And if you see corporates coming out to pick up rubbish, unless they work for McDonald's or Coca-Cola, then tell them to go away and do something more useful. Because if we have people with amazing talent on big salaries from corporates who really think that the best use of their time is planting trees or picking up litter or painting fences, you've completely missed the point of a really expensive training program that they've come from. Neighbourly, who are a fellow B Corp, have an amazing platform where they're connecting the talent that corporates have, the physical talent, intellectual talent, with projects that need happening on the ground at a local level. I think there's an opportunity, if you were to take it, as a family of AOMBs, to go to Neighbourly and say, find us a corporate who wants to help affect 8,000 square miles of Britain through the schools you've got, whether it's Marks and Spencers or other people. The schools that we're working with, which I mentioned earlier, school in St David's where I live, the head teacher's committed to spend 100% of the money that the kids save back on the school. So the kids are going to run energy, the kids are going to run energy projects, the kids are going to run energy projects, food, clothing, transport and food, working out how closely and how locally they can buy the food, and all of the money they save, the kids get to reinvest on their terms in the school. If you were to do that at scale, in every school in the AMB, you would shift the dial on innovation and understanding of local impact. And just a couple of slides to finish with. So this is why it's important to look in different places. The guy on the right of me in the straw bale interviewed Den the other day, Rob Jones, runs an American gaming website called FanDuel, which I guess no one in this room will have heard of before. I haven't. It's a gaming website for fantasy football. It's kind of where we spend our time. The interesting thing is he has 6 million people play his platform every day. And he has a revenue of like $1.6 billion. He was born a few miles from me. But the sweet thing is he said, my engineers give 10% of their time for nothing. So when you have a really cool project, a really cool tech project that needs solving, ask me and we'll do it free and fast. And there are thousands of businesses out there who have talent ready to be tapped into if we ask them good enough questions. So when we commit, Buckminster Fuller had the answer, to change something we have to build a new model that makes it old and obsolete. Because the old model of tinkering with the edges with a Band-Aid box is not going to fix the scale of challenge coming due to climate change, resource deficiencies, and everything else that we go with. And my question, I think, in closing is to say, if we acted really boldly with one voice, what's the most that we could achieve rather than the least we can achieve to actually trigger our continued funding from those who work with us? So my question to you, without asking for names now, is to say, if we could find a way of creating a program that set up something around innovation hubs that tap into the knowledge of schools and the community to fix the long-term problems in AOMBs, and we get corporates on board to help solve that, use their talents as well as everything else, how many people in this room in principle would be up for something like that? Okay, we shall do that. Good, thank you very much. Good, thank you.